Dr. Maura Hiney. She is Head of International Cooperation, Evaluation and Targeted Programs at the Health Review Board Ireland. Her background is in molecular diagnostics and epizoontology. She's been active in research integrity for over 20 years, I believe, first in Ireland and later all throughout Europe. She chaired the Science Europe Working Group on Research Integrity, is Vice Chair of the European Network of Research Integrity Offices, and Chair of the ALEA Permanent Working Group on Science and Ethics, with whom she's currently working on the next iteration of the European Code of Conduct. Before you begin, one quick question. In your experience, has Lex ever taken it easy?
No. Not that I've noticed.
The floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really honoured to be here. This is a big day for the man of the hour, Lex, and just to be included on the podium is just a great honour. So thank you, Lex. Okay, so getting down to the nitty-gritties, I guess, about collaboration and how we can help to make this a little bit better. And I also want to acknowledge that this work wasn't just mine, that my colleague Catherine Gill and also Dr. Jennifer Brennan from the Higher Education Institutes were involved in doing this work, so thank you both. I'm actually going to skip over that because I think I want to get to the scale of collaboration. I mean, we're all very well aware that collaboration has been increasing over the last, this one is since 1980, but I mean, obviously that was happening before. I mean, it's really been significant how many co-authored papers there now are. It's exploded, essentially. And some of those are with industry and some of those are with other colleagues and so on and so forth. So there's been a really, really huge rise in the level of collaboration among researchers, which is fantastic. And the IMF did a very interesting paper recently on the importance of the network effect as well. So collaboration isn't just about publishing, it's also about establishing those really important networks. And they've shown that the networks are getting bigger as well. So the number of co-authors on collaborative papers is actually rising very significantly, and that's a great thing. So why do researchers seek international collaboration? Oops, sorry. Sorry, beg your pardon. It's very confusing, there's two screens here. Okay, so why do funders incentivize collaboration? Well, many national funders, like ourselves, we require multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinary research because we feel that by including the knowledge users, for example, different disciplines, different sectors, etc., that we get better research. We also feel that it's really important that people move between different sectors because they garner fantastic experience and different perspectives and come back to their own research much refreshed, I think, and much more aware of the difficulties that other sectors have when it comes to research. So generally speaking, we think it's a good thing. The EU Framework Programme is a fantastic example where they require different partners. You cannot just simply rock up with your own idea. You have to have partners. They have to be across Europe. They have to be balanced geographically. They also look for things like gender balance, east-west balance, and so on. So they've been really pushing this area for so long. And, essentially, as I say, we feel it's a good thing. It maximizes outputs. We think it probably maximizes, in as much as is possible, impacts. It's great for us as an agency to get co-funding in so we can make our own budget go a little bit further, which is really nice. In terms of building capacity, for a small country like Ireland, building capacity in new areas, we can't do this on our own. We need to have other people helping us, other agencies, etc. And one of the things that, because I'm a health research agency, we're very interested in the idea of translation. Translation is very hard to do. Everybody knows that. But by involving the knowledge users from the get-go, so so people from the health system, etc., we feel that there is a better chance of translation. So lots of reasons why we would incentivize collaboration. Why the researchers themselves seek collaboration, because of course they come at this from a different perspective. Well, there was a nice report done by the Royal Academy of Engineering, the Royal Society, who do very interesting work in this area, and they were actually looking at spend on collaboration. So the question was, are we spending enough or are we spending too much on facilitating people to actually travel to conferences and so on? So that was the question they started off with. But actually, the results that they came up with were very interesting. So what they found was that most people saw collaboration as a really integral part of their research and of them developing as researchers. And of the 1,286 fellows and grant recipients that they surveyed, 95% of them had had at least one international collaboration. So, it's a really core for the researchers. And then they asked them, well, give us some reasons for why you'd want to collaborate. And there were all sorts of reasons as to why they'd like to collaborate. Some of it was about contributing their expertise to the field. Some of it was about acquiring expertise that they didn't have. It was about kind of expanding their own horizons, and so on and so forth. So, lots and lots and lots of good reasons. So the question then is, if collaboration is so beneficial from a funder's perspective, from a researcher's perspective, what's the problem? Why not we just belt on? So, okay, this is often a problem with these bits of research. There was a really interesting paper done by Anna Arnold and colleagues, where they looked at published reports of research misconduct cases. Let's put the caveat in there. There's a lot of bias in that, obviously, because not everybody publishes these things, and it's usually the big cases that get published. So, hands up there, a big caveat. But what they found was that of all of the reasons why somebody's research had been called into question, the big four, if you like, the big three certainly, plagiarism, fabrication, falsification, were actually, pretty common. But of course, the caveat being that probably the reason why the paper was published in the first place about this case was because it was very serious. So how did collaboration fare in all of that, though? Okay, so again, they broke it down into domains. They looked at all of the different reasons why somebody might have had their research questioned, and then they identified a domain, categorized domains. And what they found was that actually collaborative research cropped up a lot in terms of the domains of these misconduct cases. But of course, collaboration is all about doing research, so actually all research, it's not just about specifically collaboration. If you're obviously reporting, you still have to report in collaborative, you still have to do good design, and so on and so forth. So really, collaboration was everywhere in this. And they also, there was a very nice paper done by Marge Supo and colleagues in the University of Tartu, and they looked at the differences, the kind of the difficulties of matching goals. So you've got the academic institutions and the researchers' goals versus the industry goals, and they're not always the same. So that can cause real problems when you're trying to do cross-sectoral collaboration. So how do we move forward from there then? Okay, so there, again, there's been some nice papers on this, and I suppose from our perspective, we wanted to kind of consider how our national policies could be pushed forward, how could we make a more trustful environment for the researchers, and so on. And we really took to heart this idea of providing, trying to codify collaboration, which is very difficult. How do we make this better? And try to develop some sort of consultative framework. So, back in 2015, we developed policy on ensuring integrity in research. We developed a research integrity forum, which has funders, quality agencies, researchers, research institutes, so a very interesting bunch of people. And then in 2017, of course, when the European Code of Conduct was published, we revised our, okay, it took us 3 years, but you know, we were dealing with universities, so we had to go back and forth a lot. But anyway, we revised our policy in 2020, but we always felt that there was something missing there. Always. So we thought about what was that something, and the thing that everybody kept saying is, you know, collaboration really throws up its own problems. You know, that's where a lot of the rows come from, is in collaborative research. So we decided then that we would publish a framework to help people work their way through the idea of establishing a collaboration and make sure that research integrity was baked in from the very beginning. So, what does this framework look like? Well, obviously, it's based on the principles of the European Code of Conduct, because our national policy is also based on the principles of the European Code of Conduct. And what it did is it looked at roles and responsibilities, customary practices, you know, the usual governance, compliance, responding to misconduct, transparency, authorship, inventorship, and open research. And what we were not trying to replace collaborative agreements that universities would already have with industry. We weren't trying to replace them, but what we were trying to do was say, in addition to this, could you please consider these things as well? Could you please include them in your collaboration agreement? And we got the tech transfer offices in the universities to help us with this as well, so that the language would align in the policy. The general recommendations, obviously, and this is a huge one, we want people to agree from the very beginning, from the inception of the project, what everybody's roles and responsibilities are. And I think this thread of agreement from the beginning is really important. I mean, obviously things change as you go along in a project, and you may have to redo an agreement, but at least from the very beginning, please, please, please think about roles and responsibilities, but also acknowledge in a collaboration, you're often working across disciplines, across sectors. There are going to be assumptions, there are going to be kind of standards of practice that differ. So you need to tease out the language and figure out from the beginning, you know, what are the differences here, and how can we square that circle? How can we make that work within our collaboration, which is really important and often causes problems. Obviously, we want people to bake in good research practice, so thinking about their governance, thinking about compliance, so what are the different legislations and statutory instruments that they have to actually follow. Generally speaking, those will be covered in collaboration agreements, but not necessarily, because we looked at some of them, and some of them don't mention the statutory requirements that people actually need to comply with. And we needed people at the beginning to decide, how are we going to respond if something happens? What happens if things go wrong? Who's going to actually be the person you can come and report that to? How are you going to manage it? Under whose legislation? Under what codes of conduct? And so on and so forth. That's really important as well. And then this one is the one, of course, this is where the rows always happen, isn't it? Around agreeing the publication. So how are we going to publish? Who's going to be on the papers? Are we going to use the COPE guidelines? What are we going to do? How are we going to manage this? What about our data? How transparent can we be, especially if it's an industry project or an industry academic project? How are we going to share? You know, are we going to put our stuff up? Are we going to pre-register our trials, which I sincerely hope they are, etc. So they really need to kind of tease out how transparent they're willing to be in a collaboration. Hopefully more than less, but they really do need to tease that out. Authorships, always loads of rows. Who gets first? Who gets last? How many people? Who gets acknowledged? Who get, you know? Do we use the credit system of taxonomy? How do we actually? Luckily, a lot of the publishers are now sort of asking for a proper classification of people's involvement in a project. So that's been really helpful. But they've got to agree this at the beginning, because otherwise people will just go off and publish their own bit, and it's like, hey, wait a minute. We contributed to that paper as well. So it's very important. And especially with industry, obviously, agreeing about inventorship. So who owns what, IP, background, foreground, the whole lot. Try and bake that in at the very beginning. And we provided a handy little checklist for people, so you can go along and say, yep, I've thought of all of these things. And I think the message we were trying to get across to people is that everybody benefits at the end of the day from having a strong research integrity base in their collaborative agreements because of, and I'm not going to read them through, we all know what these are. I'm speaking to the converted here. I just want to acknowledge the working group that was involved with this. As you can see, there were a lot of people from the universities, but there was also somebody from the Health Service Executive, which is our national health agency, from the Higher Education Authority, which funds the universities, and so on. So we really had an interesting group of people working on this, which was very nice. And so I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hiney. Questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm Sabine Kleiner from The Lancet. Maura, that's great. I wondered if you could comment on the power structures of collaborations, because what we see a lot at journals, for example, is global health research funded by a high-income funder with kind of 7 authors and maybe 1 from Africa stuck in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
So where can funders actually ensure, that this doesn't work like that right from the start?
Yeah, I mean, that issue of equity is really big. I think this is where teasing out from the beginning what the roles and responsibilities are of everybody, especially the roles. And we ask to see collaboration agreements before they're signed off by the partners. So we have the ability to be able to check whether there's equity built in, but also equality, diversity, inclusion. We can check that those things are actually well established in the collaboration agreement, that it's very clear, that somebody from the Global South, for example, isn't just there for the field work, that actually they're a part of the team. And I suppose one good way to check off often is the budget. So who's getting the money? Mario.
And Mario from Stanford University. We've seen that Erasmus has done an incredible work in increasing the number of love in Europe and international marriages. But we're also seeing now data that when it comes to postdoc and PhD mobility, that they are being left behind. That if you've actually done a mobility in another country, that it's harder to get a full-time position in your own country because your supervisors or mentors, if you work with them, would maybe stuck out and be looking for your positions, but you have left. And we've seen that in some countries that we reported in 2022, only 1% of mobile postdocs get those positions, while 20% of those that stayed at home get them. So are there any plans, do you know, funders that are trying to address this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so we've just got funding actually for a project under Marie Curie. It's a postdoctoral school, if you like, called Dorothy, and it's around public health, obviously in pandemic preparedness. But there is a requirement in there for mobility. But there is also money, and I think we found this with a number of other schemes that we've run. There's a reintegration piece as well, because often what happens is the postdoc comes back, but they don't have any money to kind of do some research, or there's no incentive to take them back because there's no money associated with them. So I think that's one way of helping that funders can do, is making sure that there is a period of funding associated with postdocs who've been mobile to bring them back into the country. I'm actually really surprised by that statistic, because certainly in the health sciences, especially for a small country like Ireland, we want our doctors and our nurses and our whatever to go and do some training, research training elsewhere, because there's capacity elsewhere. So we give some money for Fulbright scholarships, for example, to send people off to the States.
Those are different because they're 6 months and you're still keeping your contract.
Well, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Because you are full-time employed now.
Yeah. But I mean, I think mobility is actually viewed very positively in Ireland because we're small. But you're right. I mean, we have introduced reintegration grants because it's an incentive for people to take them back, if you like. But mobility is tricky as well because it's the whole pension issue. There are still lots of problems around mobility of researchers. Yeah.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Jean-Philippe de Jong. I'm an independent consultant and I'm a philosopher. I want to focus on the word collaboration you used. From funders and also from other organizations, there's a push towards collaborations with external parties, so international, interdisciplinary, public-private partnerships, etc. That's one form of collaboration, and I think the previous speakers hinted more towards collaboration closer to home, so with colleagues, with your supervisor. And it seems to me that these two types of collaboration are somewhat conflicting. If you are pushed towards collaborations with many people from other institutions far away, it can drive you away from close collaboration with the people which are nearby and actually would contribute to a good culture at your own institution. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, I think you're right. I think the collaboration framework that we have isn't just for working with industry or working with somebody else in Europe. It's also for two different institutions in the same country, or even two different departments within the same institution, who are, because we do encourage multidisciplinary, but of course you can get the other disciplines next door, the office next door quite often. So I wouldn't see this as being just about that broader collaboration. I mean, we've had situations where we've had rows between two different academics in two institutions just up the road from each other about who owns PhD's data. And so actually we want to see this sort of conversation, this discussion happening regardless of who you're collaborating with, be they right next door or be they, on the other side of the world.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to propose that we close here and move on to the next speaker for reasons that will become apparent later. So I apologize for this slightly mysterious mode of operating. But Dr. Hiney, thank you so much for informing us about this new document about collaboration. Crucial. Thank you.